The way should we do that?
I don't know. I don't know. I'll feel bad.
You'll feel bad.
I feel bad if it was Cal Merchant. Maybe if it was someone like
Here you go, taco for the future. I came on too strong, and I get punished.
Taco, just tell me when you're ready. Just a second.
Or yours, and see if
Cut
the
it.
thing goes down.
Cut it.
Oh, have we lost him? Have you lost me?
We
never-
lost Paul. Oh, he's typing, yeah. Internet issues. Mic not working, that's what sound says now, requeue.
This is just, you know, when you're at the cutting edge of mods, someone's got to put up with the jank. And so you do us a service, sound. Can you try chat in-game? No, so I can't hear you there either. Do you want to try and fix it, or up to you? Okay. You'll just have to be extra expressive.
Nice. Oh,
That's interesting. I not remember you being a pace player.
The folder and then using your mouse to process it.
Oh,
I think that's a lot.
oh wait,
I'm
that
back.
sound.
Wait.
We got sound back.
Okay.
We got two sounds in the call!
Fine, this is fine. We can keep going.
Wait.
It's
Now
fine.
he's
It's fine.
in the game.
Keep
What?
going. It's fine.
what happened?
What the hell
We don't
happened?
have to worry about this. Okay, we can just requeue and just.
Are you split between time? What happened? I feel like your in-game voice and your Discord voice is like diverged, and I'm hearing two versions.
I am in my gym.
Everything's fine. We can keep going.
I am in my gym.
There's an imposter.
Which one is the real sound?
What is? No. Wait.
A button right there.
So weird.
Yeah, we're good. Everything's fine.
Calamart is asking to fight.
Oh, maybe to switch things up, I fight Calamart in your clothes. The way should we do that?
If it was someone like
What is happening? Wait, let me just. I can't see the Discord thing.
You don't have to look at Discord though.
The degrading just start.
What? More like a degrading, because I don't know what's going on.
Who is
I
this?
think
Identity
it's a
theft is a crime.
Full smart.
Huh?
Taco Slayer, that's for sure. I'm gonna listen.
Here's what happened. I said I was very nervous to have this fight. Shoeless is suggesting I take a grading session next week.
Oh no.
That'd
Do
be
you want me to put on your clothes and do it for you? We're both half nervous, we can both half do it. That's problem solved.
If somebody could
No! That was all planned?
So wait, have I played you at all?
Yes, you have.
Okay, at the start.
So were there actually internet problems, or was it just like,
I pulled out my internet cable.
Okay, good.
oh wow?
But then how did Taco, because I friended you?
You friended both of them! You friended both of them!
Here you go, Taco for the future. Wow, the social engineering. So had I not friended you, this wouldn't have worked, right?
Well, we had like 3 backup plans, but you really made our life easier.
Oh my
That's
god.
so cool!
If I play this in a video, it'll look scripted. Wait, okay. I can't let this identity theft go on though. If Sound does want to play.
Yeah, Sound, you should probably come back.
Yeah, okay.